Okay, I was asked to be chairman of UKIP Brighton and Hove back in 2009, and we were struggling somewhat. There's only a handful of us, and I remember particularly Des and Linda, who's now our secretary, and Phil, who's now our treasurer. But we were determined to keep walking and talking, going to see people, trying to build up the party. And we've learned a lot of lessons in the last few years about what you do need to do if you're going to win. And that's our objective. Our objective is to win 3 members of Parliament for Brighton and Hove. That's Hove, Brighton Pavilion and Brighton Kemp Town. Now, I've just had a little wink that our guest has arrived, and I would like to say something. A long time ago, a man called Winston Churchill was handed the country right in the middle of Dunkirk, and through his own personality and his spirit and his courage, he managed to lead the country out of trouble. Now, to me, our leader is very similar to Winston Churchill. He's a man who's come at the right time to rescue us from being dominated by a foreign power and rescued us from a bunch of very incompetent politicians. I'd like to give you now our leader, Nigel Farage.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me clearly at the back? Good, thank you. Well, I have to say,
Is that better? I could do without that, could I?
No, you keep that. That's for everyone.
Right, okay.
So this is the modern Labour Party and their defence of free speech. I can tell you firstly that Unite Against Fascism is funded by the trade union movement, who also fund the Labour Party, and it has on its board of deputies a whole list of Labour MPs and Labour MEPs. I want Ed Miliband to see these pictures tonight. Is this the face of the modern Labour Party in this country? Is this what democracy is all about? And I would also point out, if these people believe in democracy, they will sit down, they will hear an argument, and they will get their opportunity to give a counter-argument. Are you big enough to do that? Do you have the moral courage and confidence in your arguments to take me on in public debate, yes or no? Well, if the answer is yes, then you're welcome to stay. But if the answer is no, and if you are down to hysterical ranting, then really, I think perhaps the audience ought to feel sorry for you, because you don't understand the hard-won and fought-for freedoms that made this a great country. Because the essence of free speech. Have you ever heard a political argument, madam? Or are you so filled with prejudice you're not prepared to listen to anybody else? I have to say, this is a very low-grade debate, isn't it? A very low-grade debate. can we continue with this or not? Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, is I have, over the course of the last 20 years, spoken at over 1,000 public meetings up and down the length of this country, and never in 1,000 meetings have I come across an attempt to stop UKIP from putting their argument, and shame on these people outside and in this hall. Shame on them. And I want to say, well done all of you for running the gauntlet and having horrible abuse thrown at you. Well done you for doing it. This of course all started north of the border a few weeks ago, as some of you might have noticed. And it was very entertaining. Very entertaining. What the crowd were saying was, you are a racist party and a racist politician, so sod off back to England where you belong and don't come and pollute our country. Said with no hint of irony, none whatsoever. And it's amazing. If you look at the current firmament of British politics today, there is one British political party that believes in democracy. There is one British political party that believes in free speech. There is one British political party that has opposed every single attempt to take away our rights of habeas corpus. You know, we don't believe the government should imprison us for weeks or months without first giving us a proper charge. There is one political party that has consistently defended individual liberty, and that party is UKIP. Because the other parties actually want to take away and hand away our freedoms to an unelected bureaucracy in Brussels. And I think that if you call yourselves Unite Against Fascism, ladies and gentlemen, you've chosen completely the wrong target. Completely the wrong target. We want to live in a smaller state. And we want that democracy, freedom and liberty not just to be for the people in this country, we want those freedoms for the rest of Europe too. And that is a really important plank that UKIP is standing for. Now I can of course let you all know dear oh dear. I can let you all know, though, why this is happening. And the reason this is happening is that what happened, I don't know, half the audience are busier clapping them out than listening to me. I don't know what to do here, really. Very good. Thank you, sir. Hurrah for you. Absolutely. But the reason this is happening, I will tell you why. It's because on May the 2nd this year, in the English County Council elections, up and down the length and breadth of England, UKIP produced a result that has absolutely shaken the lazy consensus politicians of this country to their very foundations. And what you are seeing here is fear. For a long time, there was the myth that UKIP voters, just ignore it, it'll go away, I promise you. For a long time, the myth was that UKIP was taking Conservative votes and that would help the Labour Party in this country. But actually, what you're seeing tonight are people in the Labour Party and some to the left of the Labour Party who actually realise that our basic message, which is that we are unashamedly a patriotic party, that we believe in standing up for the rights of individual men and women and their families in this country, that we hold no prejudice against anybody, regardless of where they've come from in the world, but that we absolutely insist that the time has come to end irresponsible, open-door immigration, something we have never had. Something we have never had in the history of these islands. And the basic UKIP message is this: that the European Union, the cost of it all, the regulation, what it's done to jobs, and what open-door immigration has done to the job prospects of young working-class people in this country, we are the party now standing up for good, ordinary Britons, millions of them from traditional Labour voting families, and they are now coming to UKIP in huge numbers too. That's why you've seen the protest tonight. And I have to say that if the level of political debate that we've seen this evening is the best they've got to offer, I think UKIP's in the pound seats, don't you? But just as I challenged Alex Salmond when he was in Scotland, just as I challenged Alex Salmond to condemn some of the awful aggressive behaviour we saw from the nationalists, I will now say this tonight. Given that Unite Against Fascism is funded by the very same trade union movements that fund the Labour Party, and given that most of the directors of Unite Against Fascism are Labour MPs or Labour MEPs, I want to ask publicly a question to Ed Miliband tonight. Ed, is this your modern Labour Party? Is this what the Labour Party have sunk to, or will you condemn this totally anti-democratic behaviour? And we'll wait for an answer. Unlike Alex Salmond, much as I disagree with Ed Miliband's politics, I think he is a decent man, and I very much hope that he does condemn the sort of gauntlet that you've all had to run this evening. Now, we've gained a great platform from those local elections because two very important things have happened. Firstly, you know, there have been millions of people over the last few years who've been happy and confident to vote UKIP in European elections. They say, well, it's proportional representation, so there's no such thing as a wasted vote. You know, my vote will count towards getting UKIP MEPs elected. But then they say, but you know, in local elections or in general elections, you know, county elections, whatever they may be, the trouble is, if I vote UKIP in this constituency, I might let the Lib Dems in. And other voters say, well, actually, you know, if we vote UKIP, perhaps we'll let Labour in. And people are really worried that if they vote for UKIP, somebody else might get in. And the big message that came out from David Cameron just before the elections and from Downing Street was, if you vote UKIP in the English counties, you will get Labour getting elected. But what happened on May the 2nd in many cases was, if you voted UKIP, you got UKIP actually winning those constituencies. And so I think as a consequence of that, the argument in future that a vote for UKIP is a wasted vote is an argument that is dead. But I must give one particular word of thanks. There was a little bit of unforeseen help that we got during the election campaign. No, madam, you could have provided it too, I've no doubt. But on the Sunday before the May elections, we were greeted with the sight of Kenneth Clarke in his back garden, looking like he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards after a heavy Saturday night. And Clarke chose not to play the ball, but to play the player, or in our case, the players. So rather than criticise UKIP's arguments, what Clarke chose to do was to denounce us as being a bunch of clowns. And I watched this on the monitor in a BBC studio, waiting to do something else, and virtually spat my coffee out, you know. And And this wasn't with upset, it was with sheer delight, because I knew he'd completely put his foot in it, and I knew what he'd done. He'd actually emboldened lots of people. You know, if the idiots that have got us into Europe, if the idiots that have given us open door immigration, if the idiots that have basically bankrupted this country and are leading our national debt to increasing by a staggering 10% per annum, if these idiots are prepared to call UKIP a bunch of clowns, it'll harden our resolve to go out and vote for them. So thank you, Ken Clarke. I will be inviting him to speak at the UKIP annual conference in September in London. And perhaps we ought to institute an annual Kenneth Clarke Prize for contributions towards getting back the British nation state. Who knows? Maybe in the future we'll learn that actually he was one of the cleverest double agents ever. I don't know. I don't know. But that wasn't good enough. Just denouncing us as clowns wasn't good enough. No, the absolute hatred of the professional political class. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about a group of people who now sit on the front benches for the Labour, Liberal Democrat and Conservative parties, who have nearly all been to less than a handful of schools, who have then gone on to no more than 2 Oxford colleges, who have all studied PPE, and who have all gone straight from Oxford University into a research office, and none of them have ever done a day's work in their lives. They look the same, they sound the same, you can't put a cigarette paper between them on issues of major substance, they marry each other's sisters, they spend their weekends together, they have no hobbies, they have no interests, their whole life is about politics, and their whole life is about climbing up the greasy pole, and they care more about their own political ambitions than they do about the welfare of this country and the people within it. And that is why I think UKIP is striking a chord. We're striking a chord because clearly we're a party made up of ordinary men and women from a wide range of backgrounds, but all of us have had a job and done something and contributed something towards this country. We're doing well because we've actually got a policy platform. I know Nigel's been going through some of it already. We've got a policy platform that is based on common sense and is based on putting the interests of Britain first, and of standing up for this country, and of saying we will not betray the memory of our grandparents' generation who went to war to make sure that we could be a free, democratic country. So I think we really have struck the most amazing chord. Now, those in the political class have been so astonished that many of their own supporters have switched to us that the attack has now changed. So rather than Clarke lambasting UKIP, no, what Downing Street have chosen to do is they've decided to lambast their own people. It's brilliant, isn't it? Isn't Dave a wonderful Tory party leader? He is for me anyway. And they have decided to say that their own constituency associations, their own activists, their own members, their own supporters, their own councillors, their own voters, their own donors, their own door knockers, their own leaflet stuffers, they've decided that those people who are concerned about the European question, who think we should get a grip on open door immigration, who think the wind energy project is probably the biggest scam we've seen in our lifetimes, and people who think that gay marriage is absolutely not a priority for a country that is virtually bankrupt, they have decided to denounce them as swivel-eyed loons. It is totally astonishing, isn't it? And this is because we've got this professional career political class, and they actually hold the views, ladies and gentlemen, of people like you in total and utter contempt. It is remarkable. And I must say that Cameron's mob behaving like that, and Miliband now saying that he doesn't think, basically, that the British people are intelligent enough to vote in a European referendum to decide their future. And with the Lib Dems collapsing under Nick Clegg, I think that it would be quite wrong to denounce the vote that UKIP got on May the 2nd as being, you know, you've heard it before, a protest vote. Yeah? If they really want to be rude, they say it's just a protest vote. And I first heard this the morning after the Eastleigh by-election. And we went to the office, we were walking up the high street, it was about 9 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't necessarily feeling my best, I've got to tell you. And as we walked up the street, you know, I met shoppers. I met men and women shopping who said, Mr. Farage, we've just seen on the news that we're protest voters. Oh no, we're not protest voters, they said. We voted for UKIP because we believe in absolutely every word you say and you speak for me. It is not a protest vote. And these millions of people are not just going to gravitate straight back towards the Labour Party or towards the, you want to get a grip, you want to get a grip. Dear, 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 oh dear. Oh, this is quite a spectacle, isn't it? Actually, it's worth looking at this one, it really is. No, this is something else, I've got to tell you. Dear, dear, dear. They must be putting something in their tea, that's all I can say. No, and really, I think the political weather in this country has changed, and what we're now going to do is we're going to build on those successes, we're going to build the membership of this party, we're going to build the calibre of our candidates, and next year we have a European election. It'll probably take place on May the 22nd, and my aim and ambition is to say to voters from every party in this country, you have been denied for far too long an opportunity to have a say on the greatest constitutional question that this country has faced in 300 years. You've been promised referendums by everybody at election after election. Indeed, Dave Cameron even gave you a cast iron guarantee that if he was Prime Minister, there'd be a referendum. And now is your chance in the European elections of 2014 to put behind you any previous tribal ties to any political party and to put the interests of the country before your normal political party. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, with the help and support and encouragement of people like you up and down the length and breadth of this land, that we have an opportunity on May the 22nd next year in the European elections for UKIP to top the poll nationally and to cause an earthquake in British politics. And so my message to you tonight, and we'll go through more policy and questions and perhaps more speculation about the future, but my message to you tonight, and I wonder, let's just have a little test here. How many people in the room, hands up, are not members of UKIP? Goodness me, would you lock that door? No, I promise you there's no press gang here, but well over half of you are not members of UKIP, but you've come along tonight to listen to what we've got to say. And I want to say this to you. The members can ignore me for the moment, but I want to say this to you. You know, if you agree with what we stand for, if you agree with what we're trying to do, then I want you to do something that the English don't often do. I want you to stop watching the news at 10 and moaning about it and cursing perhaps under your breath at it and saying to yourself, isn't this awful? What's happened to our country? I want you to do something that the English traditionally have never been very good at doing until it came to the very 11th hour. I want you to stand up and to do something, because together, if we get all of us that believe in this, if we get all of us that are determined to hand on to our children and grandchildren the freedoms and liberties that we've enjoyed, if we get everyone together and we fight towards that goal, and we're prepared to give a couple of pounds and perhaps to expend a little bit of shoe leather, then, ladies and gentlemen, between us, we can get our country back. And that is what I've dedicated my life towards doing, and we are going to win. Thank you.
Well done, excellent.
Thank you, Nigel.
That's all right, brilliant.
Good.
Can you explain, please, why the mainstream media since 1954 have never reported on the meeting of the Bilderberg Group, whom are meeting this coming weekend in Watford, and who have been one of the most powerful influences behind the formation of the European Union, and what UKIP have done and are doing to expose them to the general public.
Okay. I think one of the problems with any form of status quo is that the politicians, the media, the civil service, and the giant multinational companies, frankly, are all swimming in the same pool. They've almost become interchangeable, haven't they? You know, the number of people who were politicians who become bureaucrats or European commissioners and vice versa. And so I think the media have tended to be uncritical of some of this stuff, and they've tended to accept the basic line that was put since the 1950s, that there was a high ideal behind the European project. And so, you know, people that met, whether it's at Bilderberg Group or elsewhere, were genuine in the 1950s in their desire to do something to try and stop the Germans smashing hell out of the French once every 25 years or so. Because that's the reality, isn't it? You know, 3 times in 70 years, the Germans invaded France, twice leading to huge global conflagrations and the death of 100 million people. So just as communism, when it was set up and they brought the Tsar down in 1917, just as that was well-intentioned, because people believed they were going to make the world a fairer place, in fact it made it even less fair than it had been before, there was a high ideal behind the European Union, and nobody dared to question it. And the reality is that time has gone on, far from being a project that brings people together round the table to have a glass of wine and be friends. What's actually happening is that against their will, the peoples of Europe are being forced together into a political union without anybody ever having given their consent. And when people vote no in referendums, like the French voted no, they ignored them. The Dutch voted no, they ignored them. Little Ireland voted no and were told, "You've got it wrong, you must go and vote again." And what has actually emerged is a project that is fundamentally anti-democratic in its nature, centrist and communist, actually in terms of its financial planning, economically ruinous in terms of the euro, and thank goodness we didn't listen to Ken Clarke, Tony Blair and all the other idiots that wanted us to join the euro. Thank goodness we kept the pound. Because if you look at the economic misery that is now being meted upon the people in the Mediterranean countries, it is damn serious. I mean, very, very worrying. And far from being a project making people love each other, the Germans now hate and resent the Mediterraneans, and the Greeks think that the Germans are as bad as they were in 1943, and we have a Europe actually where people are beginning to dislike each other, and where we see a neo-Nazi party in Greece on the rise. So it's failing. And I think now, sir, the cosy consensus that existed and the basic belief that even though the European project had its problems, it was a force for good, I think all that has changed in British politics, and the reason that it's changed in British politics is because a small, new, little, much derided political party came along and said, the emperor has got no clothes.
Like a number of people who have worked overseas for many years, I've come back to the UK with a wife who is not from the Commonwealth and not from the EU. Now, the difficulty that I have in getting her firstly into the country and secondly getting citizenship for her, you would not believe. Now, I'm not the only person in this situation, there's quite a group of us. Is there any prospect that the party would do anything for people in this situation?
You know, whatever immigration policy you have, you will always find cases that look to be unfair. But there is a basic principle, sir. There is a basic principle that I want us to have ongoing with our immigration policy, and I'll give it to you as the answer to your question. We ran a policy from the early 1950s, you know, Windrush and all the rest of it. We ran a policy from the early 1950s up until Mr. Blair got into power, where we had a managed migration into Britain of between 30 and 50,000 people a year, predominantly from the Commonwealth, you know, and those old bonds and those old ties, but 30 to 50,000 a year. There was a great hurrah last week from the coalition. They said that net immigration is down for 2012. There's cause for celebration. Do you know how many people settled here in 2012? Over 500,000. So we've gone from a country that admitted 30 to 50,000 people a year to being a country that admits 500,000 plus every single year. More people came to Britain in the year 2011 than came here between 1066 and 1950. It's astonishing, isn't it? I mean, it is a truly astonishing situation. Now, I completely understand why people from much poorer countries would want to come to Britain. You know, let's take Romania and Bulgaria, to whom the doors will be opened in just a few months' time, unless something changes. I don't blame the Bulgarians and Romanians for wanting to come and better their lives. I don't want to make them scapegoats for the way ordinary British families are feeling. I want us to focus our anger on the British political class who've given up all pretense at managing the borders of this country in the interest of our people. And I want us, going on from here, to have an immigration policy that is positive and open, but works on three basic principles. And I want us to directly steal those principles from another Commonwealth country, a country who I think have got immigration about right. And what this country says, don't spoil it by whispering the word, what this country says, it says if you've got a skill to bring and you're under the age of 50, you are very, very welcome to come to our country and to add, you know, to our economy. The second point is, by the way, if you have a criminal record or a life-threatening disease, I'm sorry, but we're not going to let you in. And the third point this country makes is, we actually couldn't care less which country you come from, what religion you are, what colour you are. That is of no interest to us. But if you come and live with us, understand that you become one of us and you join together with us in our Australian dream. And that is the immigration policy going on from here that this country needs to have.
Mr. Farage, I'd like to ask about education, in particular about university and maybe prior to university, year before university, and about welcoming international students and understanding the key element to this economy here in Brighton. How important, how huge this is locally, and how we need to encourage this important element, and we need to make these customers welcome. We need to understand, and I would like you to consider taking out of the figures of immigration the numbers of students. They benefit us in a great way. We need to acknowledge this. We need to be aware of the nature of our local economy. Please, I ask you all, as well as Mr. Farage,
Yep.
consider this for us.
I think this is a very, very interesting area. You know, I am pro business. I am pro the United Kingdom making money and doing well. And if foreign students are coming to this country, paying their fees, keeping people in work, boosting the local economy, not just of Brighton, but actually of towns and cities up and down this country, then as far as I'm concerned, the more that come, provided they're just coming to study and not coming to settle and everything else, the better. But the problem is, and you know it yourself, that so many of what appeared to be further education schemes were actually scams that were being used to operate to get people to come into the country and actually effectively, illegally become immigrants into Britain. Those scams have got to be closed. Now, I really don't know whether Theresa May has got a grip on this issue or not. But I would say this to you, if we get a grip on that issue, and if we make it absolutely clear that people are here for a time-dependent period to get their further education in this country, to benefit our economy, and to take those skills they've learnt back with them to their home countries, then frankly it could be a huge, even bigger money spinner for the UK economy than it currently is, and I'm all in favour. All right, with those caveats. I want to say two other things, if I can, about education. Firstly, we strongly believe that we are sending now too many of our youngsters to university. Far too many. I personally blame Maureen Lipman. Do you remember the phone call with the grandson? Oh, he's got an ology. That's good, isn't it? Well, actually what's happening is an awful lot of youngsters are being sold a real con. They're being told if you go to university and get a degree, you'll have a massive advantage in the jobs market. Actually, many of those people going to university academically should not be going on to pursue academics. They're not advancing themselves in the job market. They're tying round their necks a huge level of debt. And many of those youngsters should be encouraged. And we've got to stop being so snobbish and stop looking down on skills and trades in this country. And that, I think, is important. It's really interesting, but believe it or not, my wife's a European, she's from Hamburg, and if in Germany your 16-year-old son or daughter says they want to learn to be a master plasterer or carpenter or cabinet maker, it's a cause for celebration. The family are proud that their youngsters want to go on and become skilled craftsmen and craftswomen. And in this country, we think there's something shameful about it. And that's a social attitude that needs to change. It really is. Please.
I would like to reinforce the point that we need to appreciate that this economy is fragile. It is easy to damage it. It is easy to make our guests, our customers, unwelcome. And there are many other competitors throughout the world who would be very glad of the business. And we need to be aware of that. We need to...
Yeah, okay, the gentleman was reiterating the point that our economy is fragile, we need as much business as we can get, and he then used a key word, absolutely key word. He said our customers. Our customers, there are plenty of other places our customers can go to, and he's right. If we treat foreign students as customers, purchasing a commercial service and not using it as an illegal route to backdoor immigration, then I'm all in favour of doing as much of it as we possibly can.
Hello, Mr. Farage. First off, thank you, just for being Mr. Farage. I would like to ask, and I have to admit it is a bit of a criticism, why have I not heard any contradiction of the black lie from the European Union that the European Union has put an end to war for the last 65 years? This is a black lie. The European Union has done nothing to end war. What ends war is the establishment of democracy. It's the establishment of democracy that puts an end to war. I ask you, or the other Nigel, wherever it is, every single person in this room, think to yourself, name yourself one democratic country that has ever declared war against another democratic country. Apart from the anomaly of Finland in the Second World War, there is none. The European Union has not put an end to war. Democracy put an end to war. And I have never heard yourself or anybody else from UKIP contradict this lie.
Well, I can assure you, sir, that I have contradicted that lie many, many times. I've done it in public in the European Parliament, and it's there on websites, on YouTube, and everything else. However, hard as I might try to counter this ludicrous assertion, I doubt that even on my best day I could do it as clearly and as eloquently as you have just done. And I really must say, not only, sir, should you join UKIP tonight, but you jolly well ought to be a candidate for us, because you're first class.
And I should say we're going to need 54 local candidates for our 21 wards in 2015.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Nigel. Mr. Farage, I'd like to talk something really on the local level about pay scales for some of the senior managers, not just in Brighton County Council, but all over the country, when you're getting managers being employed by council people on hundreds of thousands of pounds per year, when there are people struggling with a bedroom tax, with food, You know, it's just ridiculous. Why are these people getting paid so much money for doing so little?
Again, you see, it's rather like the previous question. It's so well put that I can't fight you at all. I find it astonishing that we are going through a period now where we denigrate publicly in the newspapers people who've been successful in the private sector. You know, entrepreneurs that have set up companies and made a couple of million for themselves. We don't say, jolly well done, isn't that marvellous? We say, greedy, nasty, he must have broken the law, he must have done something awful. And we say it about successful insurance brokers, and we say it about all sorts of people who make big contributions towards the British economy, who provide jobs. There is a slight anti-success culture that is building in this country. And we do all of this whilst at the same time we turn a complete blind eye to the fact that under Tony Blair, we had the mass professionalisation of what used to be the independent civil service of this country, with top wages, in some cases trebling, over the course of the last 15 years, and yet nobody says a word about it. And one of the things I want for the UKIP recently elected county councillors here in East Sussex and over the border in West Sussex to do, I want them to tell the council taxpayers of the whole of Sussex how much of their money is going in over-lavish salaries, pensions and perks for people who, frankly, whilst running county councils may be important, are not directly contributing to the wealth of this nation. Let's expose it, because you're right, it's a scandal.
Farage, can I start, please, with your permission, to debunk the myth that we're all disgruntled Tories?
Yeah.
And introduce myself that in 1997 I was the constituency party secretary for the Hove Labour Party when we won that famous victory which caused Tony Blair to say, now I know we've won. And I learnt the bitter hard way that the Labour is not interested in a fair, just and equal society. They want a society where nobody is allowed to be successful. And I would like to ask you a question that I asked Tony Blair in the run-up to that election. As you know, I was a police officer in the miners' strike in 1985. And whatever the rights and wrongs of the miners' strike, I was not a police officer to be a hired thug for Margaret Thatcher or anybody else.
Right.
Assuming that we are going to win, because let's face it, we're now loonies, fruitcakes and closet winners, that when we win, we can have back a police force that serves the people of this country and not a government in office.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I'm perfectly happy for people to be rude to me and ask me difficult questions it's tough to answer, but it's very difficult when people keep coming up and speaking as well as that. You're quite right. You know, the police force was yet another element of independence that effectively has been taken away and politicised over the course of the last couple of decades, and so I agree utterly with your sentiment. But can I also add, please, a big thank you to the local police here tonight for turning up and making sure we can all come in and leave this hall safely. Thank you to them.
We feel proud that the English Defence League are backing you.
Are they?
We've got a personal backing from Tom Robinson.
Well, I've no idea who he is.
It's found that your supporters have exactly the same opinions as the BNP supporters.
Well, I don't think. Well, I will. Oh yes. No, fine. Well, listen. No, hang on. That's a perfectly fair question. You're quite right. Those two university professors are very anti-UKIP and have done everything they can to try and compare the UKIP party with the BNP party and the UKIP voter with the BNP voter. But let me just tell you what the essential differences are between us and the BNP, all right? Because I think that's actually, you know, it's a better suit. Well, thank you very much. and my hair's a bit longer. Let me tell you the essential difference. Point number one, the BNP are anti-European. They literally dislike virtually everything south of Calais. They want us not just to leave political union with Europe, they want us to cut ourselves off from Europe and have nothing to do with our next door neighbours. In UKIP, we want Britain and the rest of Europe to divorce itself from this false concept of European Union, and let's have a Europe of democratic nation states trading together and being good next door neighbours. That's point number one. Hang on. Point number two. The BNP believe in protectionism. And protectionism is very tempting. It's very tempting to say, let's build high tariff walls and protect all our own manufacturers in this country. But history shows that if you do that, you fall technologically behind the rest of the world. And the UKIP view is far from being protectionist. We actually feel that the European Union is too small for us. We want to be freed to have a simple free trade deal with Europe, but let's open up some proper trade channels to other parts of the world, and a very good place to start would be the 54 countries that speak English, enjoy common law, and are our real friends in the Commonwealth, right across the globe. Point number three, the BNP is essentially an authoritarian party that thinks the state needs more power to control our lives. We are a classical liberal party. You know, UKIPers would have been Gladstone supporters in the 19th century. We want the state to butt out of our lives, and we believe we're big enough and ugly enough to make our own minds up what's good for us and what's bad for us. And the last point, and the killer point, is that Article 2 of the BNP Constitution says that you can't be a member of the party unless you come from, I think the word is Anglo-Saxon / Caucasian stock, all right? You can't be a member of the party unless that's your background. We in UKIP welcome people from all races, all religions, all ethnicities, and I was amazed. I did that 2-week tour of the country, up to Hadrian's Wall, up the west side and back down the east side, and all over the country. I met people. I met a guy who just left the army, who was a Muslim, standing for UKIP in the local elections. In the 2009 European elections, there were more members of the ethnic minorities who were UKIP candidates for the European Parliament than there were for the Labour, Lib Dem or Conservative parties. They are a racist political party, and we are absolutely a non-racist political party, so much so that I changed the constitution of UKIP 2 years ago to say that if you'd ever been a member of an extreme organisation of the left or right based on prejudice, we didn't even want your membership fee. We don't even want you as a party member, whereas the Labour Party, many of whose supporters have been here tonight, the Labour Party have actually got former elected BNP councillors that have defected to them and are sitting as Labour. So answer that one, Ed Miliband too. And lastly, your point that I've been endorsed by someone called Tommy Robinson. Well, having seen some of their antics on the streets of London the other day, I couldn't work out which side was worse. His side or the kind of people we had protesting outside today. I'd basically say they're probably about as bad as each other, and the very last thing we need is a divided society in this country. We want a united society in this country, and all he was doing in saying he supported us is to try and ride on the back of our success to get himself some publicity. We don't need Tommy Robinson or whatever his blooming name is. We don't need the EDL. What UKIP needs and what UKIP is getting is good, ordinary, decent people up and down this country coming out and voting for a party that is prepared to stand up and fight for what they believe in.
Good evening. I would like to know what UKIP's attitude is to the incredible left-wing bias of the BBC.
Well, I mean, look, you know, the BBC are drawn from perhaps an even narrower group of people than our political parties are drawn from. This really is the metropolitan elite, and we've had, you know, on global warming, on many of the great issues, the BNP have really denied any proper debate. The BBC's treatment of UKIP has been truly astonishing. I'll give you an example. In 1999, in the European elections, an election in which we went from nothing to 7% of the national vote and won 3 seats in the European Parliament, but it was the story of the night. It was 86 minutes into the BBC's live coverage of the results before UKIP was even mentioned. They were very happy to talk about the Greens and the BNP and Uncle Tom Cobley and all, but it was as if we shouldn't even exist. So, you know, really nobody has cause to have greater grievance against the BBC than myself. But the world is changing, and the ability of the BBC on their own and the ability of the giant press barons on their own to influence our thinking and to tell us what we should believe in has now diminished hugely as a direct result of the internet and the multiplicity of media. You know, 25 years ago, we sat down and we watched either the ITV or the BBC news at 9 o'clock in those days, wasn't it? You know, and that was how we got our national news. Now, we put on Sky, or we put on, you know, Al Jazeera, or we put on a whole host of news channels, rolling news channels. We have a much greater choice for how we get our information. And the internet has actually revolutionised everything. And there is now a younger generation who don't watch the news at 10, who don't go, as I do on a Sunday morning, down to the local newspaper shop and almost get a hernia carrying the weight of all the newspapers. They don't buy newspapers, but they get their opinion and they form their views on the internet. And so the ability of the BBC and the press barons to influence our thinking has diminished significantly, and I think that has to be a good thing.
Hi, good evening. Could you please tell me...
Where is he?
I run an IT company. I've been in IT for over 35 years. And I go to my corporate customers, like Royal Bank of Scotland, and offer my company's services. And they turn around and say to me, no, you're too expensive. We can get our staff in from our India subsidiary using an intra-company transfer visa. And we can also pay lower than the UK going rate. We can avoid national insurance, and we can also do a trick with PAYE. I can't compete. There isn't a level playing field. Can you give me any idea what UKIP might do for me?
Well, it's a very, very good question. And it's complicated, isn't it? You know, there are, I mean, clearly, you know, I talked about the Australian answer to immigration earlier on. Clearly, there are some people with exceptional skills that we want to come into this country because they will add something that we may not have. But what you're talking about, sir, isn't the normal, sensible operation of a free market. It is a company being in a position where it's able not to have a level playing field, but to give itself an advantage by employing foreign workers at the direct displacement of British workers. And that, frankly, is a scandal. And it's a scandal not just for those that are being forced out of work. There are also many millions of people who've taken significant pay cuts over the course of the last 10 or 15 years because the result of excessive foreign labour has been to drive down salaries. Now, you know, I'm not a Marxist. I understand that companies need to make profit, but I also understand that it is not an economic benefit to this country if somebody comes in and puts one of our own people directly out of work. That is not an economic benefit to this country, and socially, particularly with youngsters, to have too many young people roaming the streets is a situation that we need to avoid. And therefore, you know, without being protectionist about it, we have to make sure that British-based companies do not give themselves tax advantages, minimum wage advantages over the employment of British-born workers. But we cannot do that all the while we're part of the European Union, because under European Union rules, we're not allowed to do it. And it's just what you've just illustrated is a crying need for a British government to put the interests of our own people first, but a British government that is impotent because they've given away that decision-making power to the institutions of Brussels, and we want to get that power back.
I'd like to change the direction of the argument slightly, because I haven't heard as yet anything from UKIP about the housing crisis, and that is clearly one of the biggest crises that we face in this city. It's a crisis we face all over the country. Now, I used to be representing this town a quarter of a century ago in Conservative Central Office, and I had a hand in formulating the legislation which brought about, quite properly, the sale of council houses. Unfortunately, we were betrayed by not being told that any new housing would be built. The result of this is now, I think you know, I won't take up more time, I would like to know, one, what is UKIP's policy, please, on social housing and on housing in general, other than getting everybody into debt until the day they die, which is totally unrealistic. And two, in this city, all four parties, including, most of all, to their utter shame, the so-called Green Party, believe in putting people into what a colleague of mine described as battery housing for battery people. In other words, for developers to be able to build, for example, a new sports centre down the road, we'd have to have some 800-odd flats, where a double bedroom was the width of a 3-foot bed and a 2-foot-6 wide door, no space for a wardrobe. Please, could you give us some answers on that? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, well... Yeah, I mean, I must say, I think you're absolutely right. I thought the sale of council houses was a brilliant policy, and it gave so many people the opportunity to do something they never thought they could do, to buy their own home, to actually, possess it. And it gave a lot of people a huge amount of self-respect in who they were. It was a great policy, but you're right, it needed to go hand in glove with more development of social housing, and it's a great tragedy we finished up in the mess that we're in. The one thing I will say on this, and this would get the mob outside howling, but the real truth of it is that the biggest single factor in the increased demand for housing in this country is the fact that we have open-door immigration and an exploding population. That is a simple, common-sense, arithmetical truth that when I said it on Question Time a few months ago, the rest of the panel nearly fell off their chairs. You know, you can't say things like that. Well, if they're true, you jolly well ought to say things like that. Given the chronic shortage of housing, I mean, we do have a chronic shortage of housing in this country. And given, I'm afraid, your point about developers, it appears the developers are very in with this coalition. Very in with this coalition. And of course, as you know, sir, from your background, if you're a developer, you want a nice greenfield site. Because a nice greenfield site is the cheapest place for the developer to develop and sell on properties. If you take a brownfield site, it's harder work. It needs rendering first and making clean and making safe. But I would say this, we do need to build a lot of houses, of that there is no question. But before we cover the bits of our green and pleasant land that aren't already taken up with useless wind turbines, before we do that, what we really must do is to prioritise our building for social housing on brownfield sites. Even though they cost more to develop, there are plenty of brownfield sites in this country. And secondly, and I think, I'd be very interested to get your comment afterwards on this perhaps, the other great housing scandal in this country is there are something like 750,000 reasonable properties, not the little box rooms, reasonable properties that are currently vacant in Britain's towns and cities. And we must focus on brownfield development and empty accommodation. That's a good start.
I studied politics up in Glasgow, Scotland. I remember last summer I bumped into you were on the phone, you're quite busy, bumped into you in Westminster with my friend. We both study up in Glasgow, and we both said to you, you should come up to Scotland.
Oh, thank you. Oh, well, at least I got someone to blame, haven't I? Thank you.
So yeah, apologies for how you were treated up there. I was in Glasgow at the time when you were in Edinburgh. And I take great interest in the Scottish independence referendum, which I will have a vote in. Since I'll graduate 2015, I will be in Glasgow in the autumn of 2014 when the vote will take place. And so my question to you is, I feel that UKIP can take a great role in the debate about Scottish independence, and I urge you not to have any reservations of coming up to Scotland again. I would urge you to keep on coming up, and hopefully the hecklers will just quietly shut up. But anyway, I think, yes, you should take a greater role in the debate on Scottish independence, and I'll just ask you, what do you think you can contribute, how you can...
Well, thank you, and thank you for the advice. I should visit Scotland, and I won't ask you for any restaurant recommendations. In all seriousness, what happened in Scotland was actually a godsend. It was a godsend because, do you know, I've received hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of personal handwritten letters from people all over Scotland, Lowland and Highland Scots and Island Scots, saying to me how absolutely ashamed they were to think that in a great city like Edinburgh, political debate was crushed down by a group of awful yobs. So I was very grateful to receive that. And I think it was also a godsend because it exposed a truth that we've known for a very long time, and that is that Scottish nationalism has for a long time had a thuggish wing. They are no different to the EDL. It's a very, very thuggish wing, and the fact that Salmon the next day refused to condemn that behaviour, I think showed Salmon up, I'm afraid, sadly, for the man that he really is. So that was a good thing. But I also think it was a good thing for this really important political reason. Salmon has stood head and shoulders above anybody else in Scottish politics for the last 2 decades. They really have. I mean, the leaders of the other parties in Scotland have been completely and utterly grey, useless, invisible, and incapable of making an argument. And Salmon, you know, he is witty, and he is a good speaker, and he does have a bit of the common touch, and he is good on telly. I mean, you know, there's no point denying any of those things. He is. So he's been able to make the running unopposed. But the argument that he's made is that Scotland can be independent of the United Kingdom and part of the European Union. Now that argument is baloney, isn't it? Because nobody can be independent if they're members of the European Union and if most of their laws are being made there. So all he would do is swap the last little bit of power that comes from Westminster to give total control across to Brussels, and frankly, in the corridors of power, you know, Scotland would have no more influence, frankly, than Yorkshire. But nobody in Scottish politics has challenged him on this. And the reason is that the Lib Dems, Labour, Conservative, Greens and Scottish Socialists all agree with Salmon that being in the European Union is the right thing, and so by default he's got away with this argument, and there's going to be a referendum held in Scotland on an entirely false premise. And the whole point of my going north of the border, as you encouraged me to do seriously, was to make that point, and the protests and the coverage actually enabled me to make that point to more Scottish people on a more repeated basis. So you have my promise, I will be coming back to Scotland.
Membership lapse, but I will be renewing for 5 years later tonight.
Thank you.
I'm not impressed with the ESS, the European Socialist Superstate. And I remember reading in one of the UKIP magazines I got a few months ago when I was still a member, that the figures they give about trade, that we depend on Europe, and they give those percentages. The magazine said that some of the figures they use are where stuff goes into Rotterdam, but doesn't go to Europe. It's used as a central focus for the rest of the world. And I know that business, our European friends are actually our European competitors. I now go on holiday abroad regularly. We've got to remember that they are our competitors, and we're all trying to do the best business at the lowest price. And that's a message I wish we could get over more, that Norway we hear of, and Switzerland, they can operate outside and it's great, but we need to be outside. And we need to be in a trade with the world, and it isn't going to be a tragedy. We will still do business, and it's a message that we need to get through.
I agree with you, and thank you for saying you're going to renew and sign up for a 5-year membership. It wasn't a plant, it was just a lead to many of the rest of you. Thank you. I'm going to make this my last answer tonight, because I know you've been in this hall a long time. I'll make this my last answer and then hand back to our chairman. There's been so much baloney talked about European trade. We were told by Gordon Brown that 60% of our trade was with Europe. Blair never went above 50%. Many lazy people still say 50%. But because, as you say, of the Rotterdam and Antwerp effect, when I was in business, when I had a real job, unlike the rest of them, you know, if I sold a cargo of copper somewhere else in the world, but I shipped it through Rotterdam, that showed as European trade, even though I'd done the business with a country in Africa. All right? If you boil it all down, 38% of our overseas business is done with the bloc that lives next door to us. Nobody is pretending that is not an important marketplace, but the argument is we should be freeing ourselves up with the rest of the world to have better trading arrangements, which we're currently prohibited from doing. The scare tactics are, you know, the sky will fall in if we leave the European Union. Do you know, nowhere in the world do you need to be in political union to buy and sell widgets from each other. And the reality is, we buy more of their widgets than they buy from us. And the idea that if we're not part of political union, that Mercedes or my favourite Rioja producer will want to refuse to sell their products in this country is to show a total misunderstanding, as politicians do, of how business works. In the real world, the consumer is king. It's the consumer that creates business, not governments. We will have a simple free trade deal with the European Union, as Norway does, as Switzerland does, and as 50 other countries in the world do. And given that we're one of their biggest export markets in the world, I would suggest that in those renegotiations, we've got them by the short and curlies rather than the other way round. All right? So we can be absolutely confident, all right, absolutely confident that business will go on, but our global opportunities will increase. And thank you everybody who's been and stayed here and prepared to listen. Those that ask challenging questions, good. That's what political, open, public meetings should be about. You know, I've done 1,000 of these, and I welcome people of all political persuasions. Whether they're for us, whether they're against us, I welcome people to come along. I welcome people to ask questions, and I'm proud of the fact that we're the only party in British politics who actually give people the opportunity and a chance to come to meetings like this. So to our chairman, Nigel, and to those that have helped make this event a success, my enormous personal thanks. Thank you.